Thank you, Megan. This is Megan Geraci with PG&E, and I'm here today with Brian Bishop, who's on our SGIP team, as well as Paloy Lin from Southern California Edison. And just a brief introduction of my part on this team. I'm actually collaborating with Christina Mills and her team at CFILC on the collaboration between PG&E and CFILC for the Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program. This is a pilot program that PG&E and CFILC are working on together to better serve the AFN community during PSPs and wildfire season. Today we brought Brian on, and Paloy, we specifically want to talk to you all about our SGIP program. And why don't I turn it over to Brian?
Hi there. My name is Brian Bishop. It's great to be with you today. I'm excited to talk about SGIP, as I always am. SGIP is a really interesting program. I've been running it for around 6 years. Been at PG&E for about 7 years. Before then, I was in the solar industry, and before then, I did what's called a green MBA. So I like this stuff, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about batteries, and look forward to your questions later down in the presentation. I'll hand it back to you, Megan.
Great, thank you. Paloy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. This is Paloy Lin. I'm an advisor on the product management team at Southern California Edison. Specifically, I help with the Self-Generation Incentive Program education and outreach. The program manager was not able to be here today, but I'm filling in for him to answer any questions specific to SCE side. Thank you.
Great. Well, Brian, do you think that we're ready to start the presentation?
I think so.
All right.
So are we starting with this slide here?
We're starting with the prepare vulnerable customers for power outages.
Yep. Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. So we'll get into this a little bit more down the road, but just to give you a little bit of context on the Self-Generation Incentive Program, as it's called. It's a program that's been around for about 20 years. And the program has been an incubator for new technologies over its history, and is currently focused on providing incentives for battery storage projects, primarily paired with solar in PSPs zones, high fire threat districts, and targeted at vulnerable customers, as the slide says. So the PSPs events, you're probably aware of. It's when the utility has to de-energize the grid for public safety. Wildfire season is approaching. And in a nutshell, SGIP provides incentives for folks to install batteries in preparation for PSPs season, so they have some battery backup in their house in advance of a PSPs. Residents who have special energy needs to operate medical equipment are especially vulnerable to outages, as the slide says, and the Self-Generation Program helps vulnerable customers purchase battery storage and paired with solar to extend the electrical power during an outage. So this is what we're here to talk to you about today. The incentives could cover up to 100% of the costs of a system for medical baseline or income qualified customers. We'll get into some of those details and the eligibility requirements coming up soon. So what is a home battery? Well, we're all familiar with batteries. Batteries do a million things for us. And but a home battery is basically a suitcase-sized battery, usually installed in your garage, and it helps to store power. It acquires electricity from the grid or your rooftop solar system to be stored and used later. That's one of the first things that SGIP does. Providing power is the second main idea behind a battery. Batteries can extend your home's power for several hours, up to multiple days, but that all depends on your power needs and your load, how much you're using, what kind of equipment you have running, etc. Those are kind of the two main functions of a battery, but I also want to mention that batteries can also help you save money on your bill. That's one of the other things that It's not really directly in scope here, what we're talking about, but batteries, if you're charging it up with your solar during the day and then discharging your battery in the evening when energy tends to be more expensive, it can potentially save on your energy bill on a monthly basis. But also, lastly, and I don't want to forget to mention this because it is part of the goals of SGIP, batteries can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the grid. Dirtier energy is generally powering the grid in the evening, and if you're using your battery instead of the grid in the evening, that can help reduce greenhouse gases. So there's a bunch of different functions that batteries perform. These two called out on the slide are really in focus today. So the SGIP program offering and benefits. As I mentioned before, incentives can offset 100% of the project. That could include purchasing the battery, installation, and rewiring. So the incentives were increased recently. This is the first year where they've been this high. They're $1 a watt hour. It's a very high incentive, and that could offset the full project cost. Of course, it doesn't go back. Yeah, thank you. The incentives through SGIP don't offset the cost of going solar. Solar is not an incentive that we offer. However, most installers out there install solar and batteries together. And there are solar programs like SASH and MASH and other programs that pair up with SGIP so that you can probably get the whole system free of charge with the incentives the way they are. Again, a battery can extend your home's power for several hours up to multiple days if paired with solar. So that is a very important point to stress. Of course, it depends on if the solar is there and if there's sun, but and your load. But that is something that could be very advantageous for you. So talk to a battery installer to learn more about the specific needs you may have. And we can get into a discussion more about that when you get your bids for this. If you're interested, you can talk to an installer and they can tell you about your load and what size of battery you may need paired with what size solar system you may need, and whether or not you just want to power critical energy needs or more than that. So those are all conversations to have with a qualified installer. So you may be wondering about how you're qualified or eligible for SGIP. So the program has a few eligibility requirements. They get very complicated. SGIP has a lot of rules, budgets, sub-budgets, carve-outs, lots of different things going on in SGIP. It's a very popular program. I don't want to get too much into the details, but I do want to very clearly outline qualifying for the highest incentive in SGIP. So that's the Equity Resiliency Budget Incentive. You have to meet one of the three criteria on the left side of the slide. Be a medical baseline customer, or you've notified PG&E of a medical condition that could be life-threatening if power is lost, or income qualified. And those income qualifications I do not elaborate on here, but we can talk about them offline if you're interested. They're standard income qualifications that you're probably familiar with in other programs, like the solar, low-income solar programs. So one of the three criteria on the left and one of the two criteria on the right, which is you either live in a Tier 2 or Tier 3 high fire threat district, the HFTD map from the CPUC, which we'll talk about, or you lost power in a public safety power shutoff 2 or more times. Now, there are times when you lose power. Sometimes maybe a tree falls on your line or there's a grid outage for one reason or another that is not related to a PSPS event. So it is important to understand whether or not you've lost power due to PSPS events or for another reason. The rules that the commission, the CPUC, have set out for us is that we can offer you this added benefit. Again, on the right side of the slide, lost power in public safety power shutoffs 2 or more times, if it is indeed for the utility de-energizing you through a public safety power shutoff 2 or more times. So again, qualifying, I mentioned the High Fire Threat District or HFTD map. You can use this link in the slide. It'll take you to a map that shows you the red areas that are Tier 3 and the orange areas which are Tier 2. You would type in your address and it would identify whether or not you're in one of these areas. If you were, that would check one of the boxes on the right of the last slide. So that would help determine whether you're in a Tier 2 or Tier 3 high fire threat district. Just for clarity, renters are eligible with landlord approval for this. The installation would take place on the premise, so the landlord would have to approve. Incentives do not affect Medi-Cal Medicare benefits and do not count as income. Application information collected will not impact immigration status. None of that information, all that information is private. It's not shared externally. So hope this information is useful. So who qualifies for medical baseline? The team put this slide together. The questions on medical baseline can probably be better directed to others on medical baseline qualifications, but as we have it here, the qualified medical practitioner must certify that that the customer is a full-time resident of the home and requires use of qualifying medical devices such as to treat ongoing medical conditions, sustain the person's life, or prevent deterioration of a person's medical condition, or for mobility. And note in red here, we've added that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, a customer may self-certify to qualify for the medical baseline rate. So you can self-certify that you're medical baseline. If once the restrictions are relaxed on COVID-19 and the utilities the rules change from the state, then we may not always allow self-certification. It may have to go back to a qualified medical practitioner certifying you. Examples of qualifying medical conditions include asthma or sleep apnea, life-threatening illnesses or compromised immune systems, which require heating or cooling needs, and that's where a battery would come in to power those devices. Paraplegic, hemiplegic, or quadriplegic condition, multiple sclerosis with special heating and or cooling needs, scleroderma with special heating needs. So the list is at the link over to the left. And again, the connection here to SGIP is SGIP provides a free battery. So if you have a medical condition that relies on electricity, during a PSPS event, this free battery can play a role. It can power those devices for at least several hours, maybe several days, depending on the conditions and the load, whether you have solar and whether there's sun. There we are. Okay, yeah, here's some of the qualifying medical devices. And this is not an exhaustive list. The complete list for qualifying medical devices is down at the bottom. We went two slides too far. Back one slide, please. There we go. Yeah. And so these are some devices you may be familiar with: aerosol tent, air mattress, dialysis machine, oxygen generator. There's a bunch of the respirators. There's a bunch of different things on this list that you may be familiar with. Again, the complete list is at pg.com/medical baseline, and those are qualifying medical devices. Okay. Now, income qualified eligibility. I want to get back to that. So income qualified residential projects are classified as multifamily low-income housing or single-family low-income housing. Okay, so there's the medical baseline qualification before. Now this is income qualified eligibility. So if you're for multifamily eligibility, low-income, eligible multifamily housing is multifamily residential building of at least 5 rental units that is operated to provide deed-restricted low-income residential housing and is either located in a disadvantaged community, we have maps for those, or is a building where at least 80% of the residents have incomes at or below 60% of the area median income. There are SGIP links at our SGIP website that provide this kind of information and in very clear form, and I can provide that for you. Actually, I'll give you the link just verbally right now. The link is selfgenca.com, SELFGENCA, selfgenca.com. And that will take you to the Self-Generation Incentive Program website, and there are forms and other useful documents that you can go to, and you'll find some of this information there. It's pretty easy to navigate. So after multifamily, now we have single-family income residences that are sold at an affordable housing cost to a lower income household that is subject to a resale restriction or an equity sharing agreement for which the homeowner does not receive a greater share of the equity than described in take a deep breath here, paragraph 2 of subdivision C of section 65.915 of the government code. So these are, this is the long-winded legal definition. Again, when you work with a contractor and get information about this program, they will help you through this process. You do not have to know this yourself as a customer, but you'll be helped by either your liaison with CFILC or another group or the contractor. So additionally, the last bullet says the equity budget is available to residential customers who have participated or who are eligible for SOMA, SASH, or DAC-SASH. So those are the solar low-income programs. So solar on multifamily affordable housing, single-family affordable solar housing, and DAC-SASH, disadvantaged community SASH. So those are the solar programs, and they also have eligibility requirements. If you qualify for those, you qualify for SGIP. We've basically cut and pasted their qualifications, their eligibility requirements into SGIP. So this is about pairing batteries with solar, and we have some websites here for you to use. I encourage you to poke around on the internet and check these out. You'll probably come up with some questions. We're happy to answer them. So at the PG&E, at pg&e.com/solar incentives, you'll find some information. Grid Alternatives is the program administrator for low-income solar programs. So this website, www.energyforallprogram.org, will help you. And then there's the East Bay Clean Energy, which is the CCA in the East Bay. They have this website here, .org/resilience. That's new solar plus battery backup. That's their program. So if you're in the East Bay and you might be located there, this could be of some help to you. So
Brian, I think, should I take this one at this point? This is Megan.
Please do. Yeah, sure.
Sure. So we wanted to talk to CFILC and your community about how you could help us get the word out to the AFN community, to our medical baseline customers regarding the SGIP program. And PG&E really wants to rely upon the CBO network to help get the word out, just because we know that you're a trusted resource and you have very broad and deep connections in the community. So what we're hoping is that CFILC and the independent living centers can help their consumers to learn about the program through their general community outreach. They will help customers to choose contractors, which will help to complete the application, as Brian said. Once you are paired with a contractor, they can help you determine if you qualify, if you meet the eligibility requirements, and what your particular situation is. They can help you to size the battery to complete all of the application components. We also want to make sure that the contractor will help you to initiate the installation and do the permitting, and which the process will take an average of 3+ months from start to finish. So we're really looking for some collaborative efforts. We are working right now on a marketing toolkit, which hopefully will be released in the next few weeks. We have what's called a marketing, education, and outreach plan that was submitted to the commission. That's the CPUC, our governing body, in February, and we're waiting final approval on that. But in that plan, we talk about what our plan is using CBOs to help us with outreach and to provide some marketing collateral to help you guys. The toolkit, when it's released, will have different messages that can be used electronically in your emails, in your Facebook posts, in however you digitally communicate with your constituents, and it will have some language that will describe the program. And we're also, I don't have it in here because it has not been fully approved, but we are requesting that there would be an enrollment fee for a successful application that a CBO helps with. So essentially, it would be a $50 fee that a CBO could be paid if they helped a customer submit an SGIP application that was successful. As I mentioned, we're still waiting on approval, so I don't have any further details on that, but that is what we're requesting. These are some useful resources. The PG&E website, we have this first one, the pge.com/CBO battery, and that will take you to our general battery page to give the basics on, what is a lot of what Brian went over. What is a battery? What can it do for you? How long can it last? There's also this next link here for residential information that's specifically on the SGIP program for residential customers. There's also a non-residential component, but today we're focusing on residential. And the SGIP database here, this is the CPUC statewide database. So all of us, both PG&E, SCE, SDG&E, and others use this selfgenca.com website. And also there is a very comprehensive list of contractors that are participating in this program. And there's this link here, which will take you to an Excel spreadsheet it's quite large, but you can filter through to find contractors that have done work in your particular area. Here are a few other additional resources that might be helpful. Contractor quotes. This particular website, this energysage.com, it's not endorsed by PG&E, but you can, it's just another resource to go and to find contractors. The public email address here for PG&E's SGIP program, and for any inquiries specifically for this program, you can contact Brian Bishop here on the call. Here's his website, his email address, and then Andrew Ace, he is our non-res lead. And I think if we go to the next slide, we can start addressing some questions. We had, actually Christina Mills had sent us a list of questions that she had gathered after our first SGIP webinar, and I'm thinking that what we can do is, Brian, maybe you could take the lead and go through some of these, provide answers to some of these questions, and Paloy, if there's anything you want to add, please feel free to jump in. So why don't we go ahead and start with these?
Great. I want to make a comment on the last slide about the list of contractors. PG&E, we can't endorse specific contractors. We can just provide a list, and that's the list at that link of the contractors who've participated in the program. But we can't necessarily recommend one contractor over another just as a legal policy. But that is the list of contractors who participated, and you can probably look in your area as to who's worked in your area, and that might be a good way to start. Okay, so the first question here is, what is SGIP? Again, SGIP is the Self-Generation Incentive Program. It's a 20-year-old program. It started out after the energy crisis in 2001. It initially offered incentives for behind-the-meter generation. Lots of fuel cells have been incented through SGIP and other technologies like internal combustion engines and
Ryan, this is
microturbines.
Could we slow down a tiny bit for captioning to keep up?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yep, I'll slow down. So I'll just go back to what I was saying. It's primarily been a generation program. So generation technologies have been incented in SGIP. But over the years, things changed. Again, SGIP can be viewed as an incubator for new technologies, and the battery storage came up around 10 years ago. Our first energy storage or battery project came to PG&E 10 years ago. But since then, it's really grown as a technology that can help both residential customers and non-residential customers. So small and very large batteries exist out there today, helping businesses do their thing and helping residential customers keep the lights on. Again, when the way batteries work is when the power goes out, it automatically turns on and keeps the batteries on, keeps the lights on. So if your battery is fully charged and you have solar, it can keep the lights on for quite a long time. And that's the idea behind this and why it's an important tool in advance of this upcoming fire season, but in the context of fire season in general, if the utility has to de-energize the grid, having a battery backup system can really help you, especially if you need to power medical devices. So that's the a key way that SGIP is playing a role for the state of California. It has received hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for these incentives to be available to customers in resilient zones, high fire threat districts, to install these batteries to improve their resiliency in general, but also in particular during fire season. So that's kind of a basic idea of what's behind SGIP. Again, it has a long history, but right now is really focused on supporting vulnerable customers and in high fire threat districts vulnerable to PSPs. So I'll move to the next bullet, which is, are there different types of SGIP products for people who need backup electricity? What are they? So there are different types of SGIP batteries that are available. There are different product manufacturers out there, but if we just focus on the residential customer who is thinking about installing a battery as backup to improve their resiliency during PSPS season, they all do basically the same thing. We're thinking about pairing a residential battery with solar. The residential battery will be 5 or 10 kilowatts, maybe 1 or 2 of those batteries in your garage connected to solar, so solar powers up the battery. Maybe it's one brand over another, but they all basically do the same thing. They might be sized slightly differently, but the market has kind of converged on a couple of different sizes. Again, 5 to 10 kilowatts battery size and duration. So there aren't that many different products, but I want to keep it simple, and rather than rattle off a bunch of product names at the risk of leaving some out, I would rather just say there are a few products out there, and they all are very comparable. And that part, actually, you don't need to figure out. Talk to your contractor, because your contractor will have a recipe of what's available and the cost. So I hope that's helpful. I also want to mention that I've said battery backup. These batteries are not intended solely for backup. So you'll recall the second or third slide I was talking, what are the purposes of batteries? And one of them is to be used regularly. That's what the CPUC decision said, that these are not batteries that should just be sitting idle until an emergency or until the power goes out. Batteries should be used on a regular basis, and the contractors will help schedule the deployment of your battery, the use of your battery, on at least a weekly basis. So it'll basically set it up to turn on and charge and then discharge at least on a weekly basis. And that is by rule, by the CPUC rule, that these batteries have to be used regularly. So they're not going to just sit idle forever until the power goes out. And there will be some communication so that they'll be charged up and ready in advance of a PSPS, because the utilities basically send out notice, well before PSPS event. And we know that the developers out there are going to be, working to inform people to charge up the batteries. But the batteries will be they're programmed to stay fully charged anyway. So I'm going to go to the third bullet. If an SGIP product is in place, how long will it last? So by rule, all the SGIP batteries have to have a 10-year warranty. They should last longer than that. The solar certainly will last longer than that. Solar should last more than 20 years. Batteries are still new, so we're still figuring out how long they last, but they have warranties. And that's, all SGIP products have to have that 10-year product and manufacturer warranty. So the contractor that you work with will offer you that warranty. And so if something does go wrong, maybe an inverter will go out or something happens, it will be replaced, minimum of 10 years. So I'm going to go to the next slide, bullet, which is, why should organizations that serve low-income or populations who need backup electricity care? Well, I think we've touched on some of this. There's an increased likelihood that PSPS events will happen. This is shaping up to be a drought year, a dry year. I'm concerned about fire. I think everybody is. But utilities will de-energize the grid for public safety. When wind conditions and fire conditions get extreme, they will de-energize the grid. And so this is why organizations that serve low-income and populations who need battery backup should care, because a battery can provide at least several hours, if not paired with solar, and possibly up to several days if paired with solar, and depending on load, in other words, how much you're consuming on site, with that kind of backup power, so it can really support people. So that's why this is important. That's why the CPUC has shifted so many hundreds of millions of dollars to this program, is to provide these kinds of devices to low-income populations or other vulnerable populations in fire zones, but also in low-income and disadvantaged communities outside of fire zones. So we've been talking mostly here about the equity resiliency budget, which is that highest incentive for, in high fire threat districts or PSPS zones. The program also offers incentives to people who are not in those zones, and we just call that the equity budget. What we've been talking about so far is the equity resiliency budget, resiliency being the key word in fire threat districts. But we do have an equity resiliency, an equity budget, a regular equity budget, slightly lower incentive, but it also offers incentives for people in the same way, just a lower incentive. So the next bullet is who qualifies for SGIP. We tackled that in the first few slides in terms of the eligibility, medical baseline, low-income, disadvantaged community folks, and the slides were on 11 and 16 and 17, I believe. Those are the eligibility slides. So we can go back to those slides if you'd like later and talk more about the eligibility, and also at that link in 2 slides ago or 1 slide ago where it's the selfgenca.com site, the criteria for eligibility is listed there. So it's a very useful little link. So what is the application process like, and who decides if an individual is qualified? The application process is something that, well, it's pretty nuanced and complicated, honestly, and there are a lot of requirements that the CPUC have ruled on, and so the application can take some time, but that's why the contractor does it. The host customer doesn't have to do it. They have to review the contract between them and the contractor, but they don't have to go through the SGIP application portal and click all the boxes, fortunately for them. So the application process for the customer is about reading the contract. Once you've picked one that you like, and I'll just take a side note there, we always encourage getting multiple bids. So when you do get the contractor list, request bids from, I would say, at least 3 contractors. It's 3 or more is a good practice to get a sense of feel for who's out there, who's installing, and what their prices are. When you pick your contractor, they're the ones who interface with the SGIP program application portal. So they're the ones who have the access and check all the boxes, basically. And they will help you decide if you are qualified. They will ask you a bunch of questions. They'll ask the customer a bunch of questions, where they live, income qualification, medical baseline, and they will help determine what budget category, whether it's equity resiliency budget or just equity budget, to apply to. Hope that makes sense. And so then what are the individual costs for SGIP? That's a good question on costs. So the incentive itself should knock out all the costs for the host customer, so there shouldn't be any. The reason why the incentive is at $1 a watt hour is to make it essentially free. That said, the utilities do not have control over what the contractors charge. So it's a contractor-customer relationship there. The contractor should make all of the costs very clear to the customer in the contract. There should be no charges with that level of incentive. There may be some extra charges. Maybe if the package involves solar, that may involve some costs, but I can't tell you for sure on that one. That's something that you'd have to, as the customer, would have to look at the contract and make their own decision. So yeah, I don't have any specific numbers for you there. Batteries, each manufacturer will have their own pricing for their batteries, and I don't have a complete list of the costs or what to expect there. Okay, moving on. So what type of financial support is available to individuals who qualify for SGIP? Well, the incentives that we're talking about. So we have also, PG&E has also made a request of the CPUC. We filed what's called financial assistance advice letter to offset some of the costs for residential and non-residential projects. That request has not been approved yet, so I'm not going to get into the details of the additional costs, the financial support that could become available, as it has not yet been approved yet. But the incentive, again, is enough, especially at the residential level, to knock out all the costs. So there shouldn't be a need for financial support. The whole intent was to make it free for eligible customers. The second bullet asks, is the application process for SGIP the same with every utility? Yes, it is. So Edison has the same rules, the same application portal. There's one application portal that all the utilities use. So the process, the documents, all the rules apply to everybody the same way in all the utilities. The third bullet asks, what differences are there between utilities that offer SGIP? Well, there will be some marketing, education, and outreach differences. Every utility will have their own MEO, marketing, education, and outreach plans that will differ. Their marketing collateral will differ slightly. But in terms of SGIP in general, the utilities all handle the program the same way. There are different funding levels for each utility. PG&E is the largest territory, so it has most of the statewide budget. Or more of the statewide budget than the other utilities, because we have more people. But in terms of the program, there are really no distinguishable differences. How long does it take on average to go through the application process and then get the products in place? A bullet on a previous slide mentioned 3 months. I want to put 3 months in quotation marks. That's not definite. It could take you, a customer, several weeks to pick a contractor. And so that it could take longer than that. It could take 1 day. It depends on the customer. And then after the customer has picked a contractor, the system may take a little while to design. Then the contractor could apply. There are a variety of constraints with certain budgets, depends on which budget is being applied to, whether it's equity budget or equity resiliency budget. But after the project is applied, and let's just say the application was successful and every document was complete, and a confirmed reservation is issued, then the contractor would go build the project. It doesn't take long for a contractor to build a project, a day or two. It could be added time if a solar installation is happening at the same time, a few days for the installation. And then there's the post-installation paperwork, inspections, jurisdictional inspections, and that process can take several months. It depends. It depends on each jurisdiction. So it can go very fast also. Interconnection can go very quickly, or it can be delayed for another reason, or one reason or another. So 3 months might be a good ballpark, might be a little bit longer, just depends on the situation. Hope that answers that question. Should people who qualify for medical baseline program apply for SGIP? I definitely think yes. They qualify for the highest level of incentive. And we've covered a lot of those details already. Why is SGIP working or not working for individuals historically and currently? Well, part of that is getting the word out, and that's what we're trying to do today. There has been massive adoption through SGIP. I don't think the only way I would say it's not working for individuals historically or currently is the program is big, it's complicated, and at times it's hard to understand. There are a variety of technologies eligible. There's a few different budgets eligible, and the rules change. Honestly, the rules have changed several times over the last few years, and it's hard to keep track of that. So we at PG&E and Edison do keep track of those rules and do our best to communicate them. But that is a nuance that hopefully we can help with and communicate about. But mostly SGIP is working. There's massive adoption, and will continue to be, I believe. And it's working because these batteries, especially residential batteries in high fire threat districts and PSPS zones, are important. They provide that resiliency, and you know, ultimately, I hope that you're interested. So I'm going to leave the last two bullets for Megan, and with that, I think I'll hand it over to Megan.
Great, thank you, Brian. So yes, I'll handle these last two. Does participation in the DDR, the Disability Disaster and Access Resources Program, prohibit a customer from participating in SGIP? And the answer is no. They are completely separate programs. The DDR program is funded by PG&E. It's a pilot program for portable batteries. They're not permanent installations. There's also other resources that are available through that program with, you know, hotel, food stipends, transportation needed during a PSPs event. And that is a completely separate program than the SGIP program. So you can participate in both, not a problem at all. The other question here is, how can organizations help in getting the word out on SGIP? So this goes back to my slides on our marketing, education, and outreach plan, which we are still waiting on approval from the CPUC. But the plan is to work with CBOs like CFILC and the independent living centers, and actually several other. We have a list of about 200 plus CBOs that focus specifically on the AFN community that we'd like to partner with to make sure that we get the word out, educate our customers on the program benefits. They can use our marketing collateral, as I mentioned, which hopefully will be available in the next couple of weeks, and that's going to include physical brochures like trifolds, and also an online marketing toolkit, which will have specific messaging based on however you're digitally communicating. And we want the CBOs to be able to help the customer to contact or to make contact with a contractor, because this is, you know, very contractor focused program. It's definitely, they're going to do the heavy lifting on the application, but we just need to make sure that if we educate the customers and get them in contact with the contractor. And I think that is all we have for the set questions, but we should go now to any questions that have come in through the Q&A.
Great, thank you. This is Megan from CFILC. So we've got quite a few questions that came in the Q&A, so I'll start reading those out now. The first one here is, can a resident simply declare that they have experienced 2+ PSPs events, or do they need to reference a specific resource? In other words, can you walk us through how to demonstrate that a site experienced 2 or more PSPs events?
So we verify the address of the residents in question at PG&E. We look up their address, and our system will tell us whether or not the resident has been de-energized for a PSPs event. It'll actually tell us when a resident has been de-energized for any reason, and that's how we know whether or not it was related to PSPs events. The contractor will submit the application with the address, and then we'll look it up.
And this is Paloy Lynn with SCE. That's the same for Southern California Edison's customers. We have a running list of customers and addresses that have been impacted by the public safety power shutoff.
Great, thank you guys. This is Megan again at CFILC. Could you clarify what is a CBO and what is the CBO network? And is there a list of CBOs that are working with PG&E that the public can review?
Sure, so I'll take this one. A CBO, community-based organization, and I don't have we have a comprehensive list of 200 plus organizations that, as I mentioned, specifically focus on the communities that were interested in participating in this program. So it could be the American Heart Association, the CFILC, Meals on Wheels, many different organizations. And as I mentioned, I don't have a fully comprehensive list at this moment that I can share, but it's several, or a couple hundred different organizations.
Great, thank you. Our next question here comes from Anna. She says, we have one local contractor who said we had to pay a $400 non-refundable fee for them to do the SGIP application. This was going to be out of pocket and not reimbursed through SGIP. Do you have any advice around that?
Brian, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, I mean, so every contractor may have their own rules on this. That was not the intent for there to be a $400 non-refundable fee to deal with this. I have heard that some contractors do charge a fee to submit the applications. One alternative is to look at a different contractor. You know, what should happen is they bake in all of the costs into the price. Basically, the application fee, all the cost of the installation, the rewiring, everything, all the installation costs should be in the application, in the costs. And those are eligible project costs that are offset by the incentive. That was the intent. So with this $400 fee, I don't have a great answer for you, except that you may want to talk to different contractors.
Thank you. This is Megan again. So you mentioned that due to COVID-19, individuals can self-certify in place of the medical certification. Will people be expected to medically certify after the pandemic? And do you have an expectation on when that certification will be due?
Brian, do you have that one? I thought, and I think we might need to go back and talk to the rates team to clarify this. I thought that it was 1 year, but I think we should probably get back to you on that. I don't want to give you any false information, but I know that it's quite a time before you have to get a doctor's signature to continue to stay on the rate.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, and I agree with what you just said, Megan, that there's nothing to prevent you from self-certifying now. I mean, if the customer is considering going through with the SGIP process and getting installation now, go for it, because those rules won't change. The self-certification rules won't change anytime soon, and maybe up to a year later. And we would work with the customer on that. So there would be, kind of a conversation between PG&E and the customer about that self-certification, medical certification. So that shouldn't hold you back.
Thank you. Our next question here says, can you speak to how many total watt hours would be available through this program? How does it work for people who have an HVAC and need to keep it going through a PSPs event?
Not exactly sure what you mean by total watt hours available through the program. If the question is how much equipment needs to be powered, what's the load, the capacity on site, that's something that can be worked with. So the customer and the contractor would talk about that. I need the HVAC on, I need a CPAP on, I need the refrigerator on, I need, X, Y, and Z other things on. You add that load up and you figure out, okay, this is how much we will need to, this is going to affect the project size, the battery size, and probably the solar size. So that's something you work with the contractor on. System sizing is something that, we talk to customers about all the time. You can have 3 batteries. It might not be a residential system, might be or large residential system. 3 batteries is fine if that's what the customer needs. So, but I hesitate to throw out ballpark numbers or specifics on that. That's just a very site-specific request, and you'd work with the contractor to size the system to meet those demands.
Thank you, Brian. The next question here says, local contractors are making it sound like you have to purchase solar as part of the program. Solar is not covered under SGIP for allowable reimbursement. How do you suggest we navigate this issue with contractors?
Well, the rules are the rules. Solar is not covered in SGIP. No incentives come out of SGIP to go to solar. And if someone is telling you, I'm reading this from Anna, that SGIP has to pay for solar, that's untrue. The SGIP incentives are not. They do not pay for solar. Solar is not an eligible technology in SGIP. Some contractors may have, unintentionally mixed the programs up. So they may be saying, yeah, you can get SGIP and SOMA together, or DAC/SASH together. So there's a difference between the low-income solar programs and the SGIP program, but some contractors bring them to the customer together. So you can apply for the solar rebate through the low-income solar program and for the storage rebate through the SGIP program. But there's a big line between the two programs. SGIP does not incent solar. Those solar programs do not incent the batteries. They're different programs, different technologies. So it would just be a matter of just clearing up that miscommunication with those contractors. I'm sure it's unintentional, but there's no mistake. The rules are the rules.
Thank you, Brian. A follow-up question. Let's see. As you know, many people.
I just I'm sorry. There is that Anna said they are saying the customer has to get solar for them to do SGIP. That's also not true. The customer does not have to get solar to get SGIP, and so I didn't answer that the first time. Some roofs don't accommodate solar, so we shouldn't say to those customers, "Sorry, you can't get SGIP." So there are reasons why that solar is not a requirement. What if the roof was old? That would be telling the customer that they'd have to spend $20,000 on a new roof in order to get SGIP. So no, you do not have to get solar to get SGIP.
Brian, if a contractor is insisting a customer has to get solar to SGIP, is there a reporting mechanism that we should use?
Well, I would want to know about that, and I would be surprised if they really pushed on that point, because it's fundamentally untrue. So I would be surprised that a solar contractor would dig in and argue that, but I'd happily field that question and talk to that contractor just to educate them, because those are not the rules. So you could forward that request to me.
Great, thank you. And could you share your email again out loud for folks?
btbd@pge.com.
Fantastic, thank you. And we have a few minutes here, so I was going to read one last question. A follow-up on that, actually. Should she also file a CPUC complaint about this contractor?
Well, that's always an option. The CPUC is there to hear these kinds of complaints. In this case, we work with one analyst at the Energy Division in the CPUC. Her name is Nora Hawkins, spelled as it sounds, Nora.Hawkins, at the CPUC website. It's Energy Division. Oh gosh, I can't. Hold on. Let me get her email address for you. Just give me 1 second here. It's Nora.Hawkins at cpuc.ca.gov. Is that .ca? I was forgetting. So Nora, Nora.Hawkins, Hawkins, at cpuc.ca.gov. And she handles a lot of customer questions and complaints, so she's well acquainted with this.
Great, thank you. And we'll read one more question here at our last bit of time. As you know, many people who qualify under medical baseline for SGIP are low income and can't afford the upfront cost for paying for the system and waiting to get reimbursed for the equipment and installation. Has there been a pot of funding identified to pay for this program to help get reimbursed?
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about. Many people who qualify are low income and can't afford the upfront cost. And the whole point in the incentive being so high is to avoid them to have to pay for it. So in the case where the contractor says, dear customer, pay for part of this upfront and we'll reimburse you at the back end, the incentive is designed so that the contractor can be the payee for the whole entire thing, and they pay for it all up front and get the whole incentive at the back end, and nothing goes in or goes through the customer's hands at all. And that's fine. That avoids that the customer would have to pay anything. Again, I mentioned before that PG&E has proposed a financial assistance pilot, which would help contractors with some payment up front, the very beginning. Once the incentive application was submitted for residential customers, they get part of the incentive right up at the time. We're talking to the Energy Division, the CPUC, about that. The rules are not settled yet, so I hesitate to get too deep into those details. We're also talking about on-bill financing concepts for non-residential customers. But for this immediate question, the idea behind the high incentive was to give the contractor full confidence that they're going to get reimbursed for 100% of the whole project, so that the medical baseline customer wouldn't have to come out of pocket for anything. So that should be baked into the contract, and the customer should just make it plain that they're not going to be able to come out of pocket for anything, but they still want to move forward. Most contractors that I can think of will take that, and they'll become the payee of the incentive after the project is installed. The contractor would get the incentive to offset the costs they incurred in building the project.
Great, thank you, Brian. This is Megan again. I just wanted to thank Brian and Megan from PG&E and Paloy from SC&E, as well as our captioner for providing our access today. Thank you, everybody, for attending our webinar. CFILC will have this archived and available online within a few weeks. And if you guys do think of additional questions about the SGIP program, please feel free to send those to CFILC staff, and we will connect with PG&E and get those answers back to you. In the chat, we have thank you, PG&E team and SCE and CFILC. So thank you, everybody, for joining, and we appreciate your time today.